You are listening to The Soul's Quiet Call, written by Akumah and voiceover by Sara.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 6, A Question of Trust. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the town as Meera closed the door to her flower shop. The day was busy, more so than usual, as it often was when the weather turned temperate and the town's energy seemed to shift with the seasons. But for Meera, there was a restlessness in the air, a tension she couldn't ignore. It had been growing for days, fueled by the quiet, unspoken distance between her and Aarav. As the last customer walked out of the shop, Meera took a moment to breathe, to collect her thoughts. She couldn't help it, her gaze drifted to the window where the town bustled with life. But her mind wasn't on the people passing by or the flowers she'd arranged. It was on Aarav. He has been different lately. More present, more aware of her, of everything. But there was an undercurrent of something unspoken between them, something that made her heart beat a little faster and her breath catch in her throat. She couldn't pinpoint it. Aarav was unpredictable. At first, he had been a distraction, someone who brought a flicker of excitement into her otherwise quiet world. But now, he was something more. He was complicated. Meera shook her head, trying to shake off the thoughts. She wasn't ready to think about it, not yet. But as she stepped out of the shop, the cool breeze kissed her cheeks, and a familiar face caught her eye. It was Aarav, standing at the edge of the market square, looking as though he were waiting for something, or someone. He spotted her immediately, his eyes lighting up in recognition. "Meera," he called, his voice warm, as though they hadn't just parted ways hours ago. She hesitated for a brief moment before walking over to him. "Aarav," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He noticed it immediately, the shift in her energy, the faint tension in her shoulders, the guardedness in her gaze. "You look distracted," he said, his tone more observant than she was accustomed to. "It's just busy in the shop," she replied quickly, her voice a little too tight. She knew she was lying. It wasn't the shop, not really. It was him. Aarav studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he processed her words. He shifted his weight slightly, stepping a little closer to her. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "Because you seem uneasy." Meera stiffened at his observation. He was right, of course, he always seemed to be able to read her, even when she tried her best to keep her distance. "It's nothing," she said, brushing it off. "I'm fine." But Aarav wasn't convinced. His gaze lingered on her, as though he were trying to peel away the layers she had carefully constructed around herself. "Meera," he said, his voice gentle but insistent, "you've been acting differently. I can tell when something's bothering you." She shifted uncomfortably, crossing her arms in a defensive gesture. She had always been able to hide behind her walls, but with Aarav, it was becoming increasingly difficult. "I'm fine," she repeated, but the words felt hollow, even to her. He tilted his head, as though contemplating his next words carefully. "Is it me?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Have I done something to make you uncomfortable?" The question caught her off guard, and for a moment, Meera simply stared at him, unsure of how to answer. The truth was, it wasn't just him. It was her. It was her gift. Her ability to see into people's hearts, their desires, their deepest secrets. And lately, her ability has been failing her. "I don't know what you mean," she finally said, her voice low, her gaze shifting away from him. Aarav's eyes softened, but there was a flicker of determination there, something that told her he wasn't about to let her off the hook so easily. "You don't have to pretend with me, Meera," he said, his words gentle but firm. "I'm not asking you to share anything you don't want to. But I can't help if I don't know what's going on in your mind." There was a weight to his words, an honesty she couldn't escape. She felt a pang of something deep inside, something between guilt and longing. She hadn't meant to pull away from him, not entirely. It was just that she didn't know how to let him in. Aarav stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. "Meera," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I know you have your reasons for keeping things to yourself. But I want you to know that you can trust me. Whatever it is you're afraid of, whatever it is that's been holding you back, it doesn't have to stay that way. You don't have to face it alone." His words felt like a balm on her restless heart, and for a moment, Meera found herself wishing she could take a step closer to him, let him in, let him understand. But then the doubt crept in, her fear of being vulnerable, of being exposed. Her ability to see people's souls had always been a blessing, but it had also been a curse. It made it hard to connect with anyone on a level that wasn't tainted by the weight of their unspoken desires. "I don't know how to explain it," she whispered, her voice cracking with the admission. "I see things, Aarav. Things in people's eyes. Their secrets, their longings. I can feel their hearts, their fears. It's like I'm constantly surrounded by other people's lives, but I can never truly live my own." Aarav's expression softened, and he reached out, gently touching her arm. "Meera," he said, his voice a quiet anchor, "I can't pretend to understand what that must be like. But I do know this, you're not alone. Not with me." Her breath hitched in her throat as his words settled into her chest. The storm inside her heart stilled for a moment, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to keep everything locked away anymore. "But how can I trust you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How can I trust anyone when I've always known more than I should?" Aarav's gaze never wavered. He was patient, waiting for her to find the courage to speak the words that had been buried so deep inside her for so long. "You trust yourself first," he said softly. "You trust that you can handle whatever comes, because you've been doing it alone for so long. But maybe now it's time to let someone else in." Meera felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crack, slowly but surely. She had spent so long shielding herself from the world, from everyone, that she had forgotten what it felt like to open up. To trust. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, the vulnerability in her voice breaking through the barrier she had kept so carefully intact. Aarav took a step closer, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her thoughts. "You don't have to do it all at once," he said gently. "But you can start by letting me be here with you. One step at a time." Meera looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always kept people at arm's length, afraid of the consequences of letting them see her. But Aarav's words, the sincerity in his voice, made her wonder if maybe it was time to take that first step. As they stood there, the marketplace bustling around them, something shifted in the air. It wasn't the loud, dramatic change she had feared, it was a quiet, almost imperceptible change, the kind that came with trust. And as Aarav looked at her, waiting patiently for her to respond, Meera realized that, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone in her silence. "I'll try," she whispered, the words a fragile promise. And for the first time, she felt like maybe that was enough.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Refer to the channel playlist for a better experience and close your eyes to let your imagination run wild. Subscribe.